and welcome again. As promised in the last episode, this episode is all about team communication, specifically why communication breaks down in teams. If you're like me, you've been in your fair share of meetings. Have you ever sat through one? Ever sat through a meeting and listened carefully, thinking everybody's on the same page, and then discovered a week later that everybody walked away with a completely different understanding? If that's happened to you, you're not alone. In fact, one of the biggest frustrations, obstacles, barriers, call it what you will, one of the biggest issues in workplaces isn't a lack of communication. It's the illusion that communication has happened when it actually hasn't. People leave meetings believing they understand one another, that they're all on the same page. Leaders believe they've been clear. Teams think they've been informed. But somehow, expectations get missed, mistakes happen, people do things other than what they're meant to be doing through no fault or action of their own. They're doing what they thought they were told. Frustration evolves and people start pointing fingers. Why does this happen? Because communication is far more involved than simply one person speaking and other people listening. My name is Brian Dance. I hold qualifications in leadership and management, backed up by more than 30 years working in business at a leadership level. And one of the most common issues I've encountered in teams, businesses, and organisations has been communication breakdowns. And what's interesting with communication breakdowns is that they almost never happen because people aren't talking. They talk, boy do they talk, but communication breakdowns happen because people think there's understanding when there hasn't been understanding. So they think communication is I talk and assume everybody understands. And sure, they've spoken, but people haven't picked up what they're putting down. Welcome to the Long Way Forward podcast. This episode is all about why communication breaks down in teams and, more importantly, what we can do about it. Before we begin, just a quick word. If you're finding value in these episodes and these conversations, please subscribe. There's plenty more ahead and loads more to benefit from, all about leadership, communication, workplace performance, and behaviour change. No fluff, just practical stuff. Let's dive in. I'll start, if I may, with a simple idea. Communication is not measured by what has been said. It's actually measured by what is understood. So if you're the person saying something, it's really important to you that the person listening understands the intention of what you're trying to say. But how often do people actually take a moment to check that? Think about that for a moment. Communication is not about what you're saying. It's measured by what people understand. And that's where so many people get caught. They think, well, I explained it. I sent an email. I told everyone. I discussed it in the meeting and everyone was nodding their heads. All of those things may be true. But understanding may still not have occurred. That's pretty weird, right? It doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. You've communicated, you've said what you wanted, you thought it was clear, people nodded their heads, and they still did not understand. So that means communication did not happen. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that just because you delivered some information, that communication was successful. People understood it. They're not the same thing. I've seen leaders spend 10 minutes explaining a project and leave feeling confident that everyone understood. Meanwhile, the team walks away with 5 different interpretations. The leader thinks that communication has occurred. The team thinks communication has occurred, but nobody actually shares the same understanding. The result? Everybody going in different directions. confusion, delays, budget overruns, failure to meet outcomes, frustration, and eventually mistrust. Here's the interesting thing about that. Communication problems aren't actually communication problems. Did that sound like politician doublespeak or what? Communication problems aren't a problem with communication. They're actually clarity problems. People think they've been clear because the idea is clear in their own mind. But the other person doesn't have access to what's in your head. They don't. They only have access to what you communicate. And sometimes there's a gap. Sometimes there's a very large gap through no fault of anybody in particular. I've experienced this myself, both as a deliverer of communication and receiving instructions. You explain something that feels obvious, something's explained to you and it looks obvious. Then someone asks a question and you realize that they interpreted it completely differently to how you experienced it or how you delivered it. Is that a light bulb moment for you? I've seen it so often. It's not a surprise. We'll just run through that again. You explain something that feels obvious, or it's explained to you and it feels obvious, and then someone asks a question and you realize that they experienced the instruction in a completely different way to you. Not because they're unintelligent, not at all. Not because they weren't listening. Clearly they were. They've asked a question. They're concerned. They want the right outcome. This is good. But because communication is filtered through individual experiences, it's filtered through individual assumptions and individual perspectives. And that's why clarity matters so much. You have to be clear. But not only do you have to be clear, good communicators don't just explain. They confirm understanding. They ask questions. For example, as a leader, I might have one of my team doing 7 or 8 different things across a bunch of projects. One of those will be of paramount importance. I have to be clear to that person that they understand the thing that's of most importance is what I need them to do. And if they don't, or they go and try something else on the list because they're more comfortable with that, they think they're working in the right direction, but they haven't done the thing that's most important. Always coming back and asking, understanding, okay, what priority have we put on these? Are there any questions? And we walk away with clarity. I don't always get it right, but I'm getting better at it. So we check assumptions. We seek feedback. We ask questions. And if we don't, that's where many communication breakdowns begin. Another major cause of communication failure is poor listening. That's an interesting one. Poor listening. How do you know when someone is listening poorly? We've spoken about trust in the last few episodes. Trust and communication are very closely linked. When people don't feel heard, communication starts to suffer. Think about a conversation where the other person is clearly waiting for a turn to speak. They're not listening. They're not really listening at all. They're not listening to understand. They're preparing a response. So they've stopped listening. They're just waiting to say something. They're waiting for you to stop so they can say something. If that's the case, there's a good chance they've stopped taking on board what you're saying and they're just waiting to talk. You've probably experienced it. Most of us have. The problem is that listening to respond, and that's what it's called, listening to respond, is very different from listening to understand. And when teams stop listening to understand, communication begins to deteriorate. Quite often when someone responds, you'll find they don't understand because they weren't listening. So you have to be very gentle and bring back clarity. If they're listening to understand, they usually make assumptions. And when they make assumptions, they don't have curiosity. They become judgmental. They've got an opinion. Judgment has replaced understanding, and collaboration becomes harder. So think about that, listening to respond versus listening to understand. If you're one of those people that jumps back with a response, answer me this honestly. Did you fully understand what the person communicating was trying to say? And if you're a leader and your team is listening to respond, you'll find that person who comes back with a snappy one-liner, did they really understand what you were trying to communicate? If they didn't, you need to let them know that listening needs to be done differently. Politely, respectfully, of course, but you need to let them know. Here's another common issue in communication. Believe it or not, people communicate differently. Now, it might seem obvious, but it's often overlooked. Some people prefer detailed information. Others prefer summaries. Some want data. Some want context. Some communicate directly. Some people communicate in a more subtle way, more carefully. Neither approach is wrong, but misunderstandings happen when we assume everybody communicates exactly like we do. One of the most common causes of frustration is putting your behaviours, assuming other people have your behaviours and your level of experience, knowledge, call it what you will. You assume that other people think like you. They don't. So don't communicate with them exactly like they were you. There's more to it. I have seen highly detailed people become frustrated because they feel others haven't provided enough information. I've seen big picture thinkers become frustrated because they feel there's too much detail. And both sides often walk away thinking the other side is communicating poorly. But in reality, they're just doing it differently. Good communicators learn to adapt, just like good leaders learn to adapt. Good teams learn to adapt. Halfway through this episode, so we're halfway there, I'd like you to think about your own communication style when you're presenting information. Do you naturally provide detail? Or do you provide summaries? Do you communicate directly or more cautiously? I tend to be a little bit more direct. I will kick off with a summary and then I'll back it up with some supporting detail. That's how I communicate. And then I'll close it out with, does everybody understand? All right, let's talk about what we understand from what I've just discussed. And I listen. So the question for you that's perhaps a bit more important, how well do you adjust your communication for the person you're speaking with? Because remember, communication is not what's comfortable for us. It's most importantly about what's effective for the audience. Let's think about the audience as well. I mean, if they're workers, are they C-suite executives? Are they students? What's their background? What's their vocabulary? What's their dress style? What's the audience? What's the scenario? You've got to adapt the way you're speaking for the audience. Well, quite often, just goes over their head. Think about that. On thinking, I also share thoughts like this on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me there, that'd be awesome. Do feel free to join my network. I tend to speak mostly about motivation, communication, leadership, performance. Also quite a few posts about sustainability because that's the environment that I work in, is environmental services and sustainability. Back to the podcast. Let's explore something now. And it's something that causes enormous communication problems. An unspoken expectation. Wow, that's massive. An unspoken expectation. If you have an expectation as a leader or as a worker, a colleague, if you have an expectation, communicate it. An uncommunicated expectation causes massive problems. It's one of the biggest traps a team can fall into. People assume others know what's expected. Managers assume employees understand. Employees assume managers understand. nobody checks, and eventually you get disappointment. The phrase I often come back to is this: the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. But here's another version, tweaked, and it's more relevant for this. Get that? I'm looking at my audience, I'm thinking about the audience, I'm going to apply a more relevant version. The expectation you don't communicate is the expectation that you shouldn't assume exists. And from where I work, it's this simple. When we onboard people, we train them in the fire evacuation process, we train them on where the lunchroom is, we teach them, the layout of the business, we teach them all of the roles and things that are important to their functions. But some businesses don't train their people in how to manage waste. And then the employee thinks they're doing the right thing, but subsequently it turns out they're not. And then the business doesn't get the outcomes they want from their waste. That's just one of the areas I work in, is helping people communicate better across their businesses in waste and sustainability. I see it all the time. It's that expectation that people will just know what to do. They don't. So they do what they think is right, and sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. Remember, the expectation that you don't communicate is the expectation that you won't get delivered on. Communicate expectations clearly, politely, respectfully, and confirm that the other party understands what the expectation is. Clarity matters. And assumptions, create problems. I'll make it practical now. If you want to improve communication in a team, here are 5 things to focus on. So 5 things to improve communication in your teams. First, prioritize understanding over delivery. Prioritize understanding. Second, ask questions to confirm understanding. Seek people's feedback. Ask questions to confirm people's understanding. Third, listen to understand rather than listening to respond. Listen, and I'll dive into that. Listen to what the other person is saying, work through and understand what they're trying to tell you. Do that before even jumping in with a question. Fourth, communicate your expectations clearly and confirm their understanding. Communicate expectations clearly. And fifth, adapt your communication style to your audience. Think about your tone, think about your pace, the clothes you're wearing, the room you're presenting in. Adapt your communication style to your audience. Here's a good one. I'm jumping back to communicating expectations. Every time you enter a car park, as a visitor, there's usually visitor car parks there. If you don't have visitor car parks clearly marked, or car parks marked for people with different abilities, people park anywhere. You haven't set the expectation. So, speed limit signs, they're an expectation, aren't they? Really clear examples there, everyday examples. Those 5 behaviours alone that I've just mentioned, by the way, those 5 behaviours: 1, prioritise understanding. 2, ask questions. 3rd, listen to understand. 4th, communicate expectations. And 5th, adapt your communication style to your audience. Those 5 behaviours can dramatically improve communication. Not because it's perfect, nothing ever becomes perfect, but it improves. Understanding improves, and understanding is what communication is all about. That's what improves outcomes. So on that, here's an exercise for this episode. After an important conversation or a meeting, ask this: what are your key takeaways from this discussion? The answer might surprise you, and they may reveal communication gaps you didn't realise existed. They may realise communication gaps that you didn't know existed, because communication breakdowns, they don't happen because people aren't talking. Communication breakdowns happen because people think understanding has happened when there's been a meeting of the minds, but there hasn't. And when you recognize that, communication becomes much easier to improve. Remember those 5 elements that I gave you that are central to communication. Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Long Way Forward. If you've enjoyed this discussion, it'd be great if you could take a moment to like, comment, or subscribe. It helps more people discover these conversations and improves their journey forward. Again, pun intended. In the next episode, I'm going to build a bit further on the topic of expectations and communication and what the best communicators consistently do differently. So if you want to become one of the best communicators, the next podcast could be one of the best ones for you ever. Until then, thank you for listening. This is The Long Way Forward.